5 days. That is all it took. 5 days between Brussels condemning a threat and Brussels rewarding the man who made it with the highest medal the European Union has ever given. On March 5th, Zelensky gave an interview. And in that interview, he said something that stopped European politics cold. Whoever blocks the 90 billion euro credit, he would give their address to his armed forces. He did not say Orbán's name. He did not have to. Every single person in every single capital in Europe knew exactly who he meant. 1 day later, the EU Commission responded. Their words were clear. This kind of language is not acceptable. Peter Magyar, Orbán's own challenger in the Hungarian election, condemned the statement. Robert Fico condemned it. The Patriots for Europe group condemned it. Every side of the political spectrum agreed on one thing. You do not talk to an EU head of government like that. And then 5 days passed. And on March 11th, EU Parliament President Roberta Metsola stood at a podium and announced the recipients of the very first EU Merit Order, the highest decoration the European Union has ever created. Brand new, never given before, no historical precedent, no tradition. A fresh political instrument, awarded for the very first time. And the recipient of the highest category? Zelensky. 5 days after Brussels said his language was unacceptable. 5 days after every major political faction condemned the threat. The man who threatened an EU head of government with soldiers received the EU's highest honor. And on the exact same day, the EU Parliament voted 385 to 147 to abolish the veto right on accession decisions. 2 events. 1 day. And when you put them in the same frame, the picture that emerges is one that Brussels desperately does not want you to see. This is not a medal story. This is not a procedural vote story. This is the story of a 5-step plan, leaked from Brussels, published by Politico, that maps out exactly how the EU intends to remove Viktor Orbán from the equation, permanently, regardless of what Hungarian voters decide. Let's go through every piece, because the mainstream media reported each one separately. They never connected them. And the connection is the entire story. Start with the medal. Because the medal tells you everything about where Brussels actually stands. The EU Merit Order was created by the European Parliament in May 2025, established on the 75th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, the founding document of European cooperation. A brand new decoration. No committee with decades of tradition. No independent selection process with historical precedent. The selection committee is personally appointed by Metsola herself. Among the 20 recipients, Zelensky, Angela Merkel, a cardinal, the band U2, a chef. The mix is deliberate. Political recipients surrounded by cultural and artistic figures, so that the political choices appear legitimized by the company they keep. A chef and a rock band make the whole ceremony feel apolitical. And then the cameras land on Zelensky holding the medal. When Merkel's name was announced in the European Parliament chamber, she was booed, loudly, by elected members of the European Parliament. Booed for the Russian energy dependency she built over 16 years. Booed for the austerity she imposed on Greece. Booed for the migration crisis of 2015. The EU's own parliament, booing the EU's own medal recipient, in the ceremony where the medal was being handed out. That is the state of the institution that just gave Zelensky its highest honor. Hungarian Fidesz group leader Adam Kosa reacted with one sentence that cut straight to the truth. Who gets the medal next? Putin? He was not being rhetorical. He was pointing at the logic. The EU Commission condemned Zelensky's threat. The EU Parliament gave him a medal 5 days later. If the standard for the EU's highest honor is now, threaten an EU leader and get rewarded, then the medal means nothing, and the institution giving it means less. But the medal is only the beginning. Because what happened on the same day in the EU Parliament is what actually changes everything. 385 to 147. That is the vote count. And the resolution those numbers produce demands the abolition of the unanimity principle in EU accession decisions. Qualified majority instead of unanimous consent. A technical reform. A procedural adjustment. That is how they described it in the press releases. Here's what they did not say. The unanimity requirement was not a bureaucratic detail. It was the foundational protection of national sovereignty, especially for smaller member states, written into the treaties that every country signed when they joined the European Union. It was the guarantee that no country could be outvoted on the most consequential decisions about who joins the club and under what conditions. It was the reason every member state had equal standing regardless of size or wealth. And it is being abolished. Not because the principle has failed. Not because a majority of member states requested the change. But because one country exercised the right it was given. And Brussels cannot accept the result. Orbán used his veto. Legally. Constitutionally. Exactly as the treaty allows. And the EU Parliament's response is to eliminate the mechanism that made the veto possible. Think about what that means. Not just for Hungary. For every member state. For Germany. The moment qualified majority replaces unanimity, no country can say no alone. Not to the next expansion. Not to the next debt union. Not to the next transfer of sovereignty. Not to anything that a qualified majority decides to push through. Germany is the EU's largest net contributor. 18 billion euros per year flowing into Brussels. Without the veto, that becomes a blank check. Whatever the majority decides, Germany pays. No single country has the power to stop it. Not even the largest economy in the bloc. And here is the legal detail that none of the mainstream outlets reported alongside the vote. In Germany, for the German representative in the European Council to agree to a shift from unanimity to qualified majority, a law must first pass the Bundestag and Bundesrat with a 2/3 majority. That is what the Integration Responsibility Act requires. The current EU Parliament resolution is specifically designed to bypass exactly that requirement. Brussels is not just abolishing the veto. It is doing so in a way that circumvents the constitutional safeguards of its own member states, and now the 5-step plan. Because this is the piece that makes everything else make sense. And this is the piece that Politico published. Not a leak from Moscow, not a conspiracy theory, not speculation. A published plan from Brussels. Reported by one of the most establishment-aligned political outlets in Europe. Step 1. Prepare the legal basis. Build the procedural framework to move forward without unanimity. Step 2. Wait for Orbán's electoral defeat. Read that again. Step 2 of the EU's official strategy for Ukrainian accession is wait for Orbán to lose the election. Not negotiate with him. Not address his concerns. Not find a compromise. Wait for him to be removed by voters and then proceed. Step 3. Play the trump card if Orbán wins anyway. Apply maximum pressure. Use every financial and legal instrument available. Step 4. Activate Article 7. Strip Hungary's voting rights. Step 5. Push through the accession. This is not a rumor. This is the published roadmap. And Step 2 tells you everything you need to know about how Brussels views democracy. Not as a process to be respected, as an obstacle to be waited out. The democratic vote of the Hungarian people is, in this plan, simply a delay, an inconvenience, something to be endured until it produces the correct result. And if it produces the wrong result again, Step 3 and Step 4 are ready. Now look at the financial weapons running alongside the plan. Because Brussels did not just draft a roadmap, it deployed an arsenal. 22.5 billion euros in EU funds frozen for Hungary. 1 billion of that permanently lost since January. 1 million euros per day in penalty payments. Over 500 million accumulated. The EU court examining whether Hungary must repay 10.2 billion euros. The Advocate General recommending annulment of the payment. Safe defense funds. Approved for 16 countries, not yet for Hungary. And the result of all of this. Hungary has become, for the first time in its entire history as an EU member, a net contributor, paying in 609 billion forints, receiving back only 589 billion. 20 billion forints more out than in. That is 16% of Hungary's entire economic output. Frozen. Imagine someone freezing 16% of the German economy 3 weeks before a federal election and then claiming it has nothing to do with the election. Nobody would accept that argument. Nobody would call it a rule of law mechanism. They would call it what it is. A regime change program funded with financial weapons. And even EU ambassadors know it is not working. A diplomat told the Kiev Post directly. Reverse enlargement is dead on arrival. Another said, we have been raising false hopes. They know. Inside the institution, the people implementing the plan know it has failed. And the pressure on Hungary continues anyway, because Brussels cannot admit that Orbán won. So they keep turning the screws. Keep freezing the funds. Keep drafting the lawsuits. Keep waiting for Step 2 to deliver what they need. Here's the question that nobody in the mainstream is asking alongside all of these stories. What happens when it is not Hungary? The veto is gone. The unanimity principle is abolished. The financial pressure toolkit has been tested and refined against a member state of 10 million people. The 5-step plan exists in writing. What happens when Germany says no to the next debt union? What happens when France blocks the next expansion round? What happens when any country, large or small, exercises the right it signed up for when it joined? The answer is already written. Freeze the funds. 1 million euros per day. Threaten the voting rights. Draft the lawsuits. Wait for the election. And if the election produces the wrong result, Article 7. That is the EU that exists today. Not the EU that was promised in the founding treaties. Not the EU of equal sovereign nations cooperating voluntarily. An EU where the rules apply until they produce inconvenient results. And then the rules are changed. Orbán did not create the situation. He revealed it. Every veto he cast, every fund Brussels froze, every step of the 5-step plan. None of it invented a problem that did not exist. All of it exposed a system that was always capable of this. A system that always had these tools. A system that was always willing to use them when the stakes were high enough. The medal was given to the man who threatened an EU leader. The veto was abolished to remove the protection of the man who was threatened. The 5-step plan maps out his removal regardless of what his voters decide. And the financial weapons make sure he cannot survive long enough for his voters to matter. That is the full picture. Every piece connected. Every story in the same frame. And here is the final number that ties it all together. The one that no outlet put in the same article as the medal ceremony and the veto vote and the five-step plan. On the day the veto was abolished, the same day Zelensky received his medal. Peter Magyar, Orbán's challenger, the man the EU was waiting on in step 2 of its plan, did not vote on the resolution. He abstained. Because he knows that in Hungary, voting to abolish your own country's veto right is political suicide. So he hid. The man Brussels is counting on to replace Orbán refused to publicly support the measure Brussels needs him to support. Step 2 of the plan requires Magyar to win. And Magyar will not even vote for the policy the plan is built around. That is not a plan. That is a wish. And Brussels is dismantling European democracy to make that wish come true. And only one channel is showing you all of it at once. Subscribe. Hit the like button, because April 12th is coming. And on that night, whatever the result, you will understand exactly what it means. Because you have seen the plan.